Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming for today's webinar. I'm Liz Downing with Takeometrics. I'm the e-commerce marketing manager here. I am joined with my co-host, Andrew Johnson. Andrew, say hello.
Hello, everybody.
And we have our guest, Joe Kovacs, who is the founder and CEO of BrandGuard. Joe's a good friend of mine. He's got a ton of information, a wealth of knowledge. Joe, say hi and tell everybody a little bit about BrandGuard, just in case they're not familiar.
Hi there, yeah, Joe Kovacs from BrandGuard. So we are a brand protection, I guess, hybrid agency and software model where we, uh, yeah, help brands identify the type of issues they have, connect them with legal counsel to help build a legal foundation for their enforcement efforts, as well as monitor and enforce on the marketplace. So trying to build a pretty comprehensive solution on that end. But excited to talk about what we're discussing today.
Awesome. Um, so a little bit of administrative housekeeping stuff. I think we had the time wrong on GoToWebinar. So this webinar is just now starting, so you haven't missed anything yet. And we're not going to have a slide deck today, but we will be sharing links to all of the resources live during the chat, in addition to in the email that everyone who registered for this webinar will receive. So everybody will receive a recording of the video, a transcript, a write-up, and all relevant links. So don't worry about that. If you've got any questions during this session, there's a little question section in GoToWebinar. Go ahead and type your question in there. We want this to be very conversational, very interactive. So ask your questions and we will answer them as we go, and we'll save some time at the end for some Q&A. I think that's about all the administrative stuff I can think of right now. So without further ado, I think we should get to also, though, we are going to have some special offers that we're going to be mentioning. We'll send out links to that kind of stuff. And there is a chance for joining this webinar today that you could win a prize. It is a secret prize, but it's probably an Amazon gift card, to tell you the truth. So you can win an Amazon gift card for coming to this webinar. So anybody who attends, I'll put your name in a hat. It'll be a virtual hat because I don't want to waste a bunch of trees. And then I'll contact you to let you know that you've won. All right, because I like to give presents. So, Joe, you deal with helping brands like protect themselves. So you help them find the unauthorized resellers, counterfeiters, people that are violating map pricing, all that kind of stuff. I imagine that by the time a brand gets to you, they've seen something, right?
Yeah.
That has alarmed them, that has impacted their sales, that has done something bad to their business. What are some of those signs that a brand can pick up just by watching their listings, by watching their sales performance? What are some of those red flags that bring somebody to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think usually by the time they get to us, they're aware that they have a problem, and usually some of the major signs are price erosion. So they know that there are other sellers on their listings, and they begin undercutting their pricing is a big one. Um, and you know now if they're a third party seller on Amazon, they'll start to see that loss of their offer in the buy box, and you have these third party sellers now competing for that prime real estate on their Amazon listings, and they're losing out because the company wants to maintain consistent pricing, but these third party sellers often don't have the same investment in the brand, and so they're competing with each other. And one of those major metrics that Amazon awards the buy box ownership around is pricing. And so that's usually kind of a big red flag. Hey, our prices are dropping. I mean, I think another one is just the existence of sellers, right? They are on their listings and they say, hey, there's somebody that's not me selling my product. How did they get it? And you know, and so I think that's the other red flag. a lot of times for, even for manufacturers that maybe aren't actively selling on Amazon, it comes in the form of a retailer or a retail partner saying, hey, your pricing is way lower on Amazon and I can't compete with that. And so a lot of times it could be, a brick and mortar retailer or some other third party seller who's seen the issue and is now reporting it to the brand, if that brand is not necessarily active on the marketplace. But those are, I think, a few ways, just the most obvious ways, right, that people recognize, hey, I have a problem. There's people selling my stuff and I don't know who they are, how they're getting it. And then that next biggest kind of result is the price erosion and loss of buy box share.
Right. So just like everything else with Amazon, there are a ton of things that you need to look at.
Right. It's
There's
one
not a
of
big
those
red flag that pops
36
up
most
and says,
important things.
hey, strange things are afoot at the Circle K. It's nothing like that. So there are a lot of things that you have to pay attention to. So,
And there are good tools out there, some of which can alert you, hey, you just lost the buy box. I know several of like the monitoring tools, or like a Helium 10 or something like that, has ways to alert you, especially if you're the only one selling your product. You shouldn't expect anybody else to be selling it. That could be helpful. It's just a part of some tools that already exist out there, that could alert you to some of that.
I think AMZ Alert is another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people come on our webinars and talk about AMZ Alerts. So,
Yep.
So there are things that a brand can do to keep an eye on things. There are red flags that can tell them that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. But once they get to you, what do you and your team, like what can you find that maybe the brand themselves can't find?
Sure. I think one, I would say a pretty major change that has, I think it's been probably a net positive change for brands on Amazon is Amazon has started showing seller information or seller address information on those profiles. So that's one thing that you can take a look at. If you click on that seller, click on their seller name, there's a hyperlink to go to their specific profile on Amazon. That's one way, especially if this is a really small issue, you've just got a couple sellers here or there, to click on that and see what information, is that somebody that you may be selling to directly? Is it a foreign seller that shouldn't have, there's again no reason they should be having your product? That's some good sort of easy steps that a brand could take, especially if this is a small issue. What we're helping, a lot of times when people come to us, they've got 100, 250. I mean, some brands with major catalogs, right? And that's just, it becomes really difficult to manage at scale, and keep track of all of that at scale. And so, a lot of times they're even asking the question, yes, we see sellers, but is it a problem? Like, yes, we see sellers, but is it worth it to go after them? And what's it really costing our brand, to have these particular things going on? And so that's what, when the brand first comes to us, we do an audit for them to help them just see, across their catalog, how many sellers do they have? Part of our tool is called Seller Insight that, we've developed a database now over the last couple of years of close to 500,000 active Amazon sellers. That's one kind of tidbit is, Amazon, kind of touts like, there's a few million Amazon sellers. There's really only about 500,000 active ones. A lot of dead accounts in there, but and so we're able to, we have a lot of contact information already on these sellers, in addition to maybe what they have on their profile, because Amazon sort of said, hey, everybody, we're going to start displaying your data a couple months before they did it. And so we've seen quite a few where they've changed that information. They've switched it to a PO box. They've even foreign sellers getting US-based addresses now, so that's displaying as if they're a stateside seller. So just having that quality information. So in that audit, we'll be able to tell them how many sellers, if they have map pricing, be able to say how many of these sellers are selling below your map pricing. And then, we also do a dive on the ROI side to say, hey, maybe you have these listings and you're only seeing $5,000 of sales going through, but what's the potential of that listing is if there are third-party sellers. So we try to help do an ROI breakdown as well, so that when people come to us, it's like, is it worth it to really even try to solve this problem for your brand? Yes, no, what's some type of return that you might see there? All of those things I think are really important as you're trying to determine, what do I do about this? What investment do I make? Do I need to hire this, high-powered law firm or not? Those are all important considerations.
Got a question for you, Joe. This audit sounds, excuse me, really useful, right? Being able to really figure out how many sellers are supposed to be on your listing, which ones are really starting to bring your pricing down. Sounds like a ton of value there. For your service, is there does it alert the seller when they start kind of, when their pricing starts climbing back up, or they start taking over more buy boxes? Is there a way that your service kind of can let the seller know that things are working and they're heading back on the right track?
Yeah, so it's obviously a little difficult to show, so go with me here for a second. No, we've created a dashboard attached to our software, to where you're seeing all the relevant metrics there from page one. So one of the main ones is buy box share, and we're able to show how much buy box you're getting, how much buy box specific sellers are getting over a time period. So that's one, relevant metric. And then price erosion, map pricing violations, to see that metric, real time, and then be able to see that over time, because you want to see, like, okay, if we are starting to take steps, is this, is this issue getting worse? Is it getting better? And that's one of the ways, like, in reporting, I think is become very important to be able to show, not just, I think in the brand protection field as a whole, everybody likes to tout, like, oh, we removed X number of sellers, like, that's great and all, but is that a seller that was hurting your price? Is that a seller that was stealing large percentage of buy box share? Like, those are the types of metrics that you need to be looking at to see, is this, are our efforts being successful? Not just the pure number of resellers, because you could remove a lot of sellers, but if they're not the ones that are hurting your brand the most, was it really effective? I think those are important metrics to take a look at.
Absolutely.
We have a really good question from the audience, and what is let's explain the difference between just other sellers and
Sure.
then hijackers. So this person actually commented earlier that he was noticing that his product detail page main images were changing and he didn't make the change. So that's like a hijacking activity. We have another person that says that we had a reseller claim ownership of the listing and we had to petition to get the listing back. We weren't allowed to sell the particular ASIN while our competition was. Like, how was that reseller able to do that? What's the difference between somebody who's just straight up selling your stuff and somebody who's actually messing with your listing in order to sell your stuff?
Sure. Yeah, so content is another big, part of, I guess, facet of brand protection, is how are your products being displayed? And I think, again, some of those softwares out there, like an AMZ alert, things like that, can let you know, hey, product images changes or bullet point change. So I mean, with Amazon being an open catalog, an open marketplace like they are, you know, a lot of that content they've allowed sellers to suggest edits and updates. You know, and that's, I think, what the point of them creating the brand registry program was for, to say, you seller, you own the trademarks to this brand, and you then become the content authority for those branded listings. So if you haven't already, you know, if you're a seller selling branded products on, you know, your own branded products on Amazon, you've got to get your trademarks, you've got to get brand registered, so that you become the content authority. You can then say, hey, I own the trademarks to this, and what you submit on those listings becomes priority over potentially what other people submit. Because yes, it is a headache. It is you know, it can be kind of a nightmare to go through seller support to get some of those things changed over time. And you know, we've seen black hat tactics, right, where people are putting crazy random images to sync a competitor's listing or get it. You know, unfortunately, Amazon, there's not a lot of great mechanisms to combat some of those black hat tactics outside of just knowing that something changed, getting alerted that something changed. And I would say, you know, our company doesn't really specialize from the content side of brand protection, but there are, you know, there are some good softwares, and I think a lot of agencies that are helping manage brands and that sort of thing, they are kind of in that content every day. And so, you know, that's definitely an area to focus, is get brand registered, become the content authority, update those listings, and then, you know, you're more likely to have that content stay the way that you want it. It gets prioritized over some of these other third-party sellers. But to the original question of hijackers, right? Like, what's the difference between a hijacker and a reseller? You know, I would commonly say hijacker is somebody that's probably selling either a non-branded version of your product or a counterfeit version. You know, that's typically a hijacker.
And then they're trying to use your listing to actually sell their bogus product.
Right, you know, like, and we see this in different product categories where, you know, I'll be honest, I was a reseller early on Amazon, just trying to sell anything I could get my hands on and make some money. And I can remember, you know, kind of the old private label version was just find any product and then slap your brand name on it. And you know, fabric shavers of all categories, right? I remember getting a hold of a fabric shaver from some random catalog, and I found a listing on Amazon that it looked the same, right? Except this person's claiming they have a branded fabric shaver and mine is non-branded. Well, you know, in the early days, I thought there's nothing wrong with that. It's the same product. So you know, I listed on his product listing, and obviously he's all mad because now I'm competing with him. And I didn't know any better at the time. You know, this was, again, early days of Amazon. And so, you know, I think those are commonly the two ones you have to watch out for, are people just selling something that looks like your product, you know, and they're like, yeah, it's close enough, and hijacking the listing in that way. Or somebody clearly going after, maybe you have a hot selling product and they're creating a counterfeit version and trying to sell in the listing. Whereas when we talk about unauthorized resellers, or resellers in general, that language, I'm typically talking about somebody that actually has your legitimate product that they got, say, retail arbitrage in a store. You know, they bought it for on clearance and now they're selling it on your listing. It's not counterfeit, or they bought it from a distributor or some other wholesaler or something like that, but it is your branded product. I'd say those are the two kind of big distinctions.
So someone asked a question that really, it's such a nice transition. Is it true that someone can sell under your listing if they're selling an identical product, so your product, but your listing is not officially trademark or brand registered? So in other words, does brand registry protect you from resellers selling your actual items?
The answer is no. Brand registry does not. I think there was some confusion, and this still kind of persists, that brand registry somehow means brand gating, or cutting off access to sell your product.
We have a question about
Brand
brand gating
registry,
too. So, but go ahead
yeah,
with brand registry.
yeah. So brand gating was always kind of touted as this, like, I kind of think of it like the mythical pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Like, if I could just get brand gated, nobody would be able to sell my product, and I would be the only one. And the reality is that happens for almost nobody these days on Amazon. There was a period of time, maybe late 2016, 2017, where Amazon was kind of starting to do a little bit of that before they had really developed other tools. And then they realized quickly, like, no, we don't want to do this. And I've had conversations with like the guys in the Transparency, the team at Transparency, which is Amazon's like, I guess, QR code brand protection, product authenticity initiative. But they said, we don't want to brand gate anybody. Like that, it goes against Amazon's flywheel. Their whole, we want an open marketplace. We want people selling more products because it increases selection, decreases prices on the platform. So brand registry, again, it gives you a mechanism to go after counterfeit sellers, is its primary use, as well as help make you the content authority and give you some additional marketing collateral, like the ability to put video and some other additional images, things like that. But its primary use is not to gate or cut off access to being able to sell your product. I will say Transparency, if you truly have a problem with counterfeiters, you've got foreign sellers commonly are selling against your product, or it could be even this case where somebody's selling a non-branded, they just randomly picked it up from somewhere and it kind of looks like yours. Transparency could be really beneficial. And I would say this is typically for the Amazon only seller, right? This bigger brands that have a widespread distribution doesn't really work that well, because again, Amazon wants you to label everything that you send, not just to them, but you send anywhere. They want you to label at the manufacturer level. And so the whole point is Amazon, when that product comes in their warehouse, or even somebody trying to sell it merchant fulfilled or seller fulfilled from their own location, Amazon will ask them to scan that transparency code, a QR code that you would have labeled your product with, and it's a unique identifier code for each and every single unit of your product. It's a unique code. And so if somebody tries to send it into Amazon's warehouse and they don't have that code on it, it will get rejected. If somebody tries to seller fulfill it and it doesn't have that code, or they can't input codes to prove authentic product, it will get rejected. They can't even list on your listing. So that works, again, really well if you're a Amazon only seller. You got really closed distribution, you're not selling to anybody else. It can help cut off those kind of rogue sellers, those hijackers. It does take a little time to get set up. It's not free, but it's not super high cost either. So I definitely look into that. If you're brand registered, you've got your trademarks, you can get into the transparency program pretty easily. So that's definitely something to look into there.
Hey, Joe. So for everything you've been describing, it sounds like there's two main ways a seller can be selling your product that in like an unwanted way on your listing, right? Either they are an unauthorized seller or they're a counterfeiter.
Right.
Would you say that you see more of one than the other, or how's that been?
Yeah, well, I mean, we specialize in the unauthorized sellers, so naturally we see more of those. But we do get a good bit of people coming to us and they just like, I've got these problems, help me figure it out. So, I mean, for the brands that have Amazon's not their only channel, they have widespread retail distribution. They commonly deal with unauthorized sellers. because they're selling it in other places, and sellers have learned they can get,
Buy
access
it
to
in
the
those other
product.
places.
Yeah, they
Then
can get
turn
it at
around
a
and sell it on
discount
Amazon.
and turn around and sell it on Amazon. And so, those types of brands typically have those issues with unauthorized. Now, sometimes you could have some counterfeiters sneaking in there too. If you've got just tons of sellers, how do you know the difference? I mean, a really big clue is somebody selling your product at a price that just doesn't make sense, right? Like, there's no way they could be selling my product below the price that I sell it to distributors, for instance. Okay, he either probably stole it, got it for free, truck, something fell off the back of the truck, or it's somebody counterfeiting your product. And again, we have, as a part of our database, we've got tons of foreign sellers that are selling on Amazon. We've got their contact information, so that can be another kind of red flag. Like, it's becoming less of one as they get kind of smarter and get US-based addresses, but we've been tracking again for the last several years, and so you can say, yes, this is a foreign-based seller selling at a price that just doesn't make sense. High chance of counterfeit. Do a test buy. Like, if you're just not sure, do a test buy of that product. I mean, we've seen where it's like fulfilled by the seller and it takes like 2 months to come in, and they never get the product. Even then, you can make a brand registry violation. That's, brand registry is primarily for those types of sellers. If you do have the unauthorized seller issue, that is a bit more difficult to deal with. It has a few more steps involved, in terms of building a legal foundation to be able to go after these sellers, because it's not just naturally wrong for people to resell your authentic product.
That's been a question actually that's been coming up. Like, how are people allowed to sell? And one thing that I noticed, because I shop on Amazon way more than I ought to, when
We
you
all do,
go
I'm
to
sure.
a listing, there is a button that says sell this product.
Right. They want
So
to make it easy.
if you happen to have an Amazon seller account in addition to your shopping account, you can click that button. And if you don't have a seller account, you can click that button and it prompts you to sign up for an Amazon seller account. So, I
Right.
mean, they actually make it very, very easy to sell other products,
Yeah.
and to sell your products unless you have certain things in place. I imagine that it's easier if you've got trademark and brand registry. It's easier to get an authorized seller off of your listing. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes and no. Like, yes, in that it gives you a mechanism. So, for instance, if that seller is clearly breaking one of Amazon's terms of service, you know, their kind of rule book, right? If they, for instance, we've seen sellers that will drop ship a product, say from Sam's. Sam's is selling the product at a really low price because they've negotiated a better price with the brand, and somebody will essentially list that product on Amazon, and then when it sells, they'll essentially purchase it from Sam's Club, and Sam's Club ships it to the seller, right? That's drop shipping. So that's one way that that's clearly against Amazon's terms of service, and we've been able to report that kind of seller inside a brand registry and get them removed. Now, if you're just telling them, hey, he's selling it below my MAP pricing, or hey, this guy's not authorized, take him down, Amazon will do nothing. They will send you a message, an automated message that says, we respect the right for brands to make warranties, and we respect the right for brands to, it's essentially the brand's job to police their distribution, is how Amazon will put it.
So how does
So
that
they're kind of
work?
like,
Somebody asked the question, like, is there a standard template that you could share of a letter you could send to a third party seller to say, hey, don't sell my product anymore, my products anymore? I guess
sure.
all you have is, like, you can ask them to not do it anymore, or you can sick the law on them and say, this is hurting my business, therefore I'm suing this person. Like, what when you get to the point where you're getting unauthorized sellers off of a listing,
Right.
like what is the process?
Yeah, good question. So again, step one is, the legal foundation side of it. So just to do I'm not a lawyer, this isn't legal advice. So there you go. But I work with lawyers all the time, and we work with specialized outside counsel that specializes in this area. And a part of copyright trademark law is there's basically a section called the first sale doctrine that you may have heard of it before, but essentially it says if I buy your product legitimately, I can essentially resell it where I want to, and it's not copyright infringement. It's not trademark infringement. So that's what a lot of resellers are basing their activities on, right? First sale doctrine. And that's where if you send them a templated cease and desist letter, which you can find all over the internet, which basically is stop selling my product or else, a lot of those sellers will say, go pound sand, first sale doctrine. I can sell your product legitimately. And they can under that ruling, right? And as recent as like 2013, that first sale doctrine was upheld by the Supreme Court. However, there's also been a body of law that's come up that's as exceptions to the first sale doctrine. So the first sale doctrine is not a hard and fast rule across the board. And so exceptions, things that would sort of make it to where a brand could enforce, are things like if you can show that there's something materially different about your product than what these unauthorized sellers are selling. Now, material difference could have two factors: physical differences, i.e. they're selling it in the wrong packaging. I mean, we've seen where companies will take, sellers will take Latin American product that has Spanish on the packaging and bring it back to the US and sell it under the English listings. Well, that's a physical material difference, especially when there's things like food manufacturers and you've got allergy warnings in Spanish that somebody in the US who doesn't know Spanish isn't able to read. Now they eat that and have an allergic reaction, right? Like that has a consumer effect. And then there's the non-physical, which is where a lot of our companies are dealing with is, access to your consumer warranties, quality control standards, ability to recall product, customer service. I mean, there's probably close to 60 different non-physical material differences that you could create or sort of build into your reseller policies, your processes, et cetera. And if you can create that difference, now that can connect to trademark infringement. So we did a little kind of a wide circle here, but the whole thing is now we're not going after these sellers, stop it or else. We're saying, hey, your selling activity could be considered trademark infringement because you're not able to offer all the services, benefits, warranties that we do to our end customers. And because there's this likelihood of customer confusion, especially on Amazon, most people still don't know, am I buying this from Amazon? Am I buying this from the brand? Am I buying it from some random third party? Did that random third party house that, that food product in their 90-degree warehouse or something? In their, so there's that potential when you don't know who this seller is, how they're getting the product, how they're warehousing it. Maybe they got old liquidated product. It can really impact the customer experience, can really impact, create some serious liabilities if somebody got a hold of your legitimate product and had some type of negative experience with it. And so.
And the what doesn't exactly have to hit the fan in order for you to say, hey, there's too much risk involved with you selling my product.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't want to wait till those things happen, right? Like we don't want to get sued for something, or we don't want our pricing to go to crap just to now be able to go, what do I do about this? It's great to be preemptive, and we work with brands that have that. I think just naturally some of us are kind of like, well, we're not going to do anything about it until something catastrophic happens, because maybe we're having a hard time to see is this worth it. What we're trying to build is a really cost-effective and affordable sort of comprehensive structure, because there's a lot of things to navigate here, and it's difficult, it's tough slogging sometimes. And so we do want to help empower people, like for instance, some people use our software to be able to understand who the seller is, monitor the marketplace, but they've already got legal counsel, and they may have they've got some of the other things figured out, and we just work with them on that basis. But for most of the people we work with, we help them put those reseller policies in place, help them create those material differences in their policies, create those legal letters that actually have teeth to them. And yes, you could be eventually threatening lawsuit if needed, but there's a lot of things, because nobody wants a lawsuit. The brands don't want lawsuits, these sellers don't want a lawsuit. And so if you can show them why the first sale doctrine doesn't protect them, why they, what they're doing could constitute as trademark infringement, and invite them to have a more direct conversation rather than I'm just going to ping, I'm just going to make some sort of brand registry violation, get your account shut down. A lot of times they will negotiate with you, or they will say, sure, I didn't know your policies were that, I'll remove my product. And so we have a lot more, I guess, beneficial dialogue with sellers by contacting them directly on behalf of the brands and in starting a conversation, rather than just coming straight out the gate saying, I'm going to sue you, like.
Well, one of our attendees has actually asked, like, how well does that conversation go, especially when you're dealing with people outside of the US?
Outside of the US, I mean, if they're selling, so here's the thing. Just because somebody lives outside of the US, if they're selling in the US, they're still bound by the laws of the United States for selling that product. So if they are, let's just say you distributed to Europe, you distributed to Asia, and that product came back to the US via, an Asian seller or a European seller, those conversations, like we've seen, I'm thinking of one electronics manufacturer where they do Asian distribution, and we had some sellers out of Japan that were selling legitimate product. We sent them a letter, we sent them emails, and they responded. They did, but if they're selling counterfeit versions, that usually doesn't go very far. They're already actively breaking the law, and in those cases, again, it would be better to use something like a brand registry. But you could still, and we've seen it where brands have brought a case in the US, a lawsuit. Again, it has to be worth it. This seller has to be hurting you to kind of go that distance. But you can get what would typically happen is you bring that lawsuit, the seller is not going to respond. You'd get what's called a default judgment, means they didn't respond, so you win by default. And then you take that default judgment to Amazon and their account gets shut down. So again, we typically don't go that route. We've only seen lawsuits. I work with probably 90 plus manufacturers now, and we've had 2 that have brought lawsuits against sellers. And that was more for stolen product. I would say almost 98% of the time, we've been able to be effective by just communicating directly with the sellers, working out some type of negotiated arrangement if necessary, or they just bring their product down because there's easier pastures. There's brands that aren't worried about this and they'd rather go sell theirs and not have to deal with the headache of you contacting them. So have a legitimate legal foundation so there is teeth, so you could bring legal action if necessary, but seldom, almost never is that worth it. And does a seller really want that either?
That makes sense. We have a number of questions, and I think that probably there are longer answers. So let's hit a couple of those.
Let's roll.
We noticed that Amazon has a new automated variation service, AVS, and we're seeing all sorts of weird third-party variations on our detail pages. Can brand registry help eliminate this? We're the registered brand owner, and normally we would merge sellers like items onto our page. Now Amazon is variating as the 2021 version or updated version. This is bakeware products and we do not have any newer improved versions. Do you have any advice about that?
Yeah, again, our focus isn't so much on the content side of it. And so I'm not super familiar with like that new automated variation service. But if they are selling a legitimate variation of your product, or as third-party sellers often do, they created a multi-pack, they created a bundle, something like that, and then it gets just tacked on as I would say more often a multi-pack where it's multiples of that product gets sort of attached as a variation. You still have the ability to go after and communicate that with that seller as an unauthorized seller to get them to bring their product down. And if nobody is selling on that particular listing, that variation will, show up as inactive. And so it's, I understand that it can be really difficult once it is created to get it totally removed. And unfortunately, that's just a challenge of working with, Seller Central and the catalog team and all those guys. It can feel like a black box sometimes. So, I mean, there still is the pathway of going after those sellers directly to get, so those variations, there's nobody selling them actively. If you can't get them merged or get them basically delisted from your main listing.
Hey, Joe. Got a good question from the audience. I know you touched on this like a little bit earlier, but it seems like that, manufacturers often want Amazon to control map pricing, where on the other side, Amazon, as you mentioned earlier, they want the manufacturer to be more policing map pricing and kind of get that done
Right.
on their own. With BrandGuard, like, do you have a way that you can help brands really kind of, enforce that, or how do you guys like help with that situation? I know it's a pretty common one.
Yeah, absolutely. So map pricing, I wrote an article not long ago on Web Retailer about this, but map pricing is really, you're maintaining price integrity. There's really two sides of the same coin. So you have authorized sellers who you have a relationship with, and you're giving them permission to sell your product. That's commonly who you'd institute a map pricing with. It's kind of helping keep those authorized sellers in line, right? And so the other side of the coin is the unauthorized, the ones you don't know who they are, how they're getting the product, they're selling your product, and more often than not, it's those guys that are instigating the price erosion. And then your authorized sellers follow that because they're like, I can't compete. I'm not winning any sales. So I'm going to follow, Wowzer Mart. Who knows who Wowzer Mart is, but I'm going to follow them, because I want to win the buy box. And so now when those authorized sellers feel like you're not doing enough to police the brand, they're like, well, we got to make some money somehow. We got to sell this somehow. So I would say two things. Yes, have a map policy. Know that the real purpose of that is policing your authorized sellers, the ones that you know and you should have a relationship with. Then have a resale policy that goes into some of these material differences, et cetera. So now you have a pathway to go after these unauthorized sellers who then, now they have some tools out there, in terms of Amazon showing contact information that you have a chance to contact that way. Or, like I said, we've built that database and we've built that system to go after those guys. And we find when you go after the unauthorized guys and you start paring down those numbers of resellers, now you have the select few authorized sellers who really appreciate the efforts that you've taken to make it easier for them to sell at map and make some money, get some buy box share, et cetera. And so you've really got to be doing both, right? Go after the unauthorized guys, have the map in place. And yes, if you're unauthorized guys, if you're be tracking the marketplace, be tracking what they're pricing at, so that then you can communicate with them and you have we commonly see 3 steps, right? First step's a warning. You need to bring your price back up to X. Second step is maybe a short-term hold on them being able to purchase your product. Ultimately, you're really, your only enforceability for MAP is cutting off access to your products. So if you can't do that, your MAP program is not going to be successful. And so that's why it's so important to be able to have another pathway to go after these guys on the basis of unauthorized trademark infringement, not just pricing. But those two working together can be very effective.
Great. That's really helpful. So how helpful, I know, like going back to the very first question that I asked you, which is from the brand perspective, what can they be doing to keep an eye on things? One of the things that they need to keep an eye on is their own listings. They
Right.
need to keep an eye on competition to make sure competition isn't necessarily selling their product, but isn't claiming to sell their product, right? So they need to pay attention to their brand name as a keyword in other listings. They need to pay attention to the competitive landscape in general. They need to pay attention to their share of voice, all that kind of stuff. We are offering a free market intelligence analysis to anybody who is joining this webinar. I'm going to pop that link into the chat. But that's something that it's Amazon, right? So like at the very beginning, we said there's so much you have to pay attention to. We just did a webinar not too long ago where we talked about the inventory performance index, because that's something you have to pay attention to. You have to pay attention to your seller reputation. You have to pay attention to your seller health, your order defect rate. And that all ties into your seller feedback. And when you've got an unauthorized seller on your listing, all of those things can be impacted too. Maybe not so much the inventory performance index, but maybe, because if they're selling on your listing and all of a sudden there's an inventory problem just in terms of like lack of availability or whatever.
Or you're not selling through your product because somebody else has the buy box share, now
Right.
you got more stale inventory sitting there. It definitely could make an impact.
Well, and you can't advertise if you don't have the buy box. That's right, Andy? I'm not lying.
You're not lying. You're correct.
Yeah. So if somebody is stealing your share of the buy box because they're selling your product without your knowledge, that's not only are you losing your organic rankings, but and your organic sales, but you're losing the ability to advertise your products. So that's no fun
And that
at
goes
all.
for third-party sales and vendor sales as well. AMS, things like that is not going to run if you're not, if Amazon's losing the buy box to a third-party seller. And which you can see those in metrics. Some of the own reports that you can pull from Vendor Central and from Seller Central is how much of the buy box am I losing out to? On Vendor, it'll say lost buy box due to price. And then in Seller Central, it'll just say, here's how much of the buy box you won in this time period. So it's kind of like two different sides, but the same metric.
So let's talk about buy box for a second, because you would think if you're the only seller of a particular product, the majority of time you would have the buy box. Like, in what cases would you not have the buy box if you're the only seller of your product?
I'd say the biggest ones would be Amazon's pricing policies, to where if your product is showing up cheaper on a competitor website, and we're not just talking about the Walmarts of the world, it could be some other, say, random website that's showing up in Google Shopping, Amazon price matches or just shuts down the buy box when there's a lower price somewhere else than on Amazon. Feels like really predatory pricing policies, if you ask me, but it is currently what's happening. And so, analyzing MAP and controlling your pricing doesn't just mean what's happening on Amazon. It can mean what's happening in other places. Maybe the biggest effect is that it shuts down that buy box, and so your conversion rates and things like that are going to drop when that's not the case. Because Amazon, better or worse, they want to have the lowest price or match the lowest price that's out there.
Well, you can get in hot water too if you're selling on multiple channels and you list your product for a price lower on, say, Walmart or your Shopify site, and it's lower than the price that you have on Amazon. I mean, that's big
I mean,
trouble
there's
for you.
nothing legally wrong with that. I mean, you have that right. It's just Amazon
Doesn't like
doesn't want to be the loser, right? So they're going to that's just one way that we've seen you're the only one selling, but you're not getting buy box 100% of the time. It could be due to some of those issues.
One thing I've found too, Joe, my past work or past career, I was working at an Amazon reseller out in Houston, Texas. We found that sometimes we would lose the buy box on products without any competitors, but we weren't selling the product like cheaper anywhere else. We thought that maybe you've heard of this before. Maybe we would be selling at a certain price, and we would increase the price like a certain percentage, and that might have knocked us out. Is that something you've seen before too?
Yeah, definitely. In my days as we've helped with some marketing things in the early days, but yes, like we've seen where brands like ran a promotion and for an extended period of time, so the average selling price was $10, let's just say, and then they're like, okay, promotion's over, regular price is really 15, but that average selling price that got locked in was $10. So when Amazon sees you increase the price to what you want to normally sell it at, they can shut the buy box down. So yeah, that's definitely another instance if you have sort of erratic or inconsistent pricing, which I guess could be if you've got a bunch of 3P sellers selling your price at a discounted rate. It sort of builds that low average selling price. So when you do want to increase the price, you get them all off. Amazon could potentially limit the buy box there.
Yeah, we had our friend Gary said that he has resellers that their price is way higher than theirs. So I guess that's a strategy too for a black hat. But he said our price is $100. This person's price is $400.
And sometimes some of that could be like we've seen where people are selling a product on eBay, for instance, and they're using something like Joe Lister to like cross sell products that are on Amazon to eBay, and they just have a sort of ridiculously high price because they're trying to just sell it, one or two here or there on eBay for way more than the normal selling price. So that could be some of that too, is like maybe they're drop shipping to another platform and trying to get lucky.
That's a great point. I am just anecdotal, and this is totally worthless, but I'm going to say it anyway. I had this favorite lip color that Clinique made. It was called Paprika, and they discontinued it. And the Clinique actually has this wonderful program where it goes around to different countries and tries to find the product that you want that's been discontinued in the US. And this was nowhere to be found. I looked on eBay and there was one tube of it for $700.
Right.
And I was like, I love it, but I don't love it that much.
I don't love it that much.
But
yes.
That's the thing about eBay. And I think eBay is definitely becoming more brand friendly. I'm seeing a lot of brands going back to eBay and selling on eBay, but eBay still has that X factor of pricing where if you've got something that's super rare, it's supply and demand, right? So you can say, yeah, you can have it for $600, or $700 or $800.
How bad do you want
whatever.
that tube of lipstick?
Well, and has it been opened? What did they do to it? They could have spit on it. I don't know. I didn't buy it, but that's a great point though. A lot of times those vast price variances can happen because there's a multiple listing service involved. And it's just a glitch in the system.
I mean, I've been involved. I've seen where, especially like high-end cosmetics, beauty products, they literally will sell empty containers on eBay of the branded product so that somebody can come back and fill it with, this high-priced cream selling for $300. They'll go fill it with Nivea, some cheap cream, package it up, wrap it in cellophane, it looks new, and they'll sell that thing on eBay for $98, as a new high price beauty product, but it's super cheap, So definitely have to be on the lookout. And eBay has tried to implement some things to cut down on that, but it's still an issue. And I've seen people that will go buy that and try to flip it on Amazon for $300 as brand new. So it's a dirty world out there sometimes in the land of
It
the underbelly of e-commerce.
it is.
But I think all in all, there's definitely some great strategies. And the more that you can be aware, the more tools like you guys have to understand what the competitors are doing, where the competitive landscape, monitoring your listings and pricing. I think just awareness, getting your head out of the sand, or just getting to become more aware on an active basis. That's always going to help bring you to a better place than just pretending it's not a problem, or getting help to do something about it, because it won't go away on its own. I think that's the reality.
I've been typing the answers to some people's questions because there's been a couple like, what is brand registry? So we'll be including a link to the Amazon brand registry page. I also popped out a link to Joe's web retailer article about Amazon map pricing. We did have a question about map pricing. Can you, would help if I read it instead of trying to remember it. But can you have your retail policy contained within your map policy, or does that have to be separate?
It's typically advised to be separate. I mean, now you can say we have a map policy that exists. You can read it here. I might include some language in your resale policy that lets people know and be aware of it, that it exists. But it's good to have it be a separate document.
Okay, cool.
Just sometimes in different states, map pricing can be, in certain locations, you're not allowed to have map pricing, et cetera. So that can be a little bit more touchy subject in some locations. And so it's just better to have them sort of exclusive of each other, and but still let people know about them.
That makes sense. Andy, do you have any other questions, or do you see any questions that I missed, or are we ready to talk about special offers and give everybody like a minute back?
Well, I guess one question I had. I don't know if exactly you can answer for this, but I know you mentioned earlier, like maybe a black hat strategy was for some kind of the sneakier sellers to potentially, put like bad pictures or something on a listing and make it kind of, make it like Amazon to flag it and take the listing down, right? And so I know, for me, I'm on like kind of like the sales consulting side. I hear a lot about sometimes that, but more in general about Amazon taking down listings all the time. So I don't know, Joe, if this is something you guys can handle or touch on at all, but do you have like any advice or strategies on generally how to help bring listings back once Amazon takes them down?
Patience, persistence. No, I mean, there's really no magic bullet. Again, that's not necessarily the thing that we specialize in, but I think it's commonly just trying to understand what exactly you're flagged for, which I don't know why that can be so hard sometimes, but it can be, and just working through. So we had a client like last week that they sell a supplement. That supplement was flagged for violating a random new update in terms of ingredients, and so Amazon shut one of their best-selling listings down. And so they're calling seller support, they're getting nowhere. And back from our days of consulting, we just said, hey, ask for the captive team. See if you can get to a more US-based team that could get you some answers. And so they did that, and they were able to get their listing back on within a couple days by dealing with the more US-based or captive team seller support. That's probably my only hot tip. And
You
I
can
know that's not new, but go ahead, Liz.
you can also, if you've got an ASIN that's suspended, you can also talk to Chris McCabe about that. He and Leah are pretty good at helping have that conversation with Amazon. So e-commerce Chris, y'all, I talk about him all the time. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Joe, thank you
Yep.
so much. This has been so
Thank you.
valuable. I'm going to put in the chat before you guys leave. And what a great audience today too. You guys have had great questions and I just love it. So
Thank
if
you.
you go to brandguard.com and you click on the schedule a call button, all you have to do is put in your email address and the team will reach out to you. Mention that you are an attendee of this webinar and you'll get a special discount should you need BrandGuard services, but they do free audit just because Joe's a nice guy. We are also doing a free market intelligence analysis, and I've kind of popped that link in here a bunch of times, but we'll include all of these links in the write-up in the email that goes out to you as a registrant/attendee of this webinar. And one lucky person will win an Amazon gift card just for showing interest in showing up today, especially when GoToWebinar had the time wrong. So if you want that market intelligence analysis, follow that link that I just put in the chat. Just put in your information and we will take care of you, give you a bunch of scoop information about your competitive landscape. And if you see a red flag, then you know to call Joe. And then you get that free audit and see how it all just works together so well. It's just beautiful.
I just
Andy?
have one question. How do I
Yeah.
get a digital hat? You know, the one that you were pulling out of? How do I get one of those?
I say digital hat, and really what it is that I will have a spreadsheet of everybody's names, and then I'll just like randomly sort it a bunch of times, and I can copy and paste them. They've got that website where it's like a
Randomizer, right?
randomizer, yeah, and like whoever's name pops up wins. So that's the digital hat, is an online
right.
free randomizer. Never underestimate the power of a randomizer.
Well, thank you guys so much for
Thank
having
you,
me on.
Joe. That's great. It's great. And if you've got any questions, joe.kovacs@brandguard.com, L. Downing at techometrics.com, A. Johnson at techometrics.com, and you can always contact us via the website. Thank you for attending today, and we'll see you next time.